is entitled Widely Told Hasidic Tale. A rabbi asked his pupils how they could tell when the night had ended and the day was on its way back. Could it be, asked one student, when you see an animal in the distance and can tell whether it's a sheep or a dog? No, answered the rabbi. Could it be, asked another, when you can look at a tree in the distance and tell whether it's a fig tree or a peach tree? No, said the rabbi. Well, then when is it? His pupils demanded. It is when you look on the face of any woman or man and see that they are your sister or brother. Because if you cannot do this, then no matter what time it is still night.
So let me introduce myself just a bit. I've been here before. My name is Reverend Alexa. Reverend Kimberly and I are friends. And I am a minister at large in this general part of Montgomery County and adjacent counties, doing a lot of preaching and social justice work. And life is good. She, her. Let me start with a little quiz. When I say a TV or even radio show about the most famous cowboy of all, who would you name? John Wayne, okay. Those are people. Let's go for the characters people like them played.
Pecos Bill.
Okay, Pecos Bill, we have a nomination. I must come from a generation where the Lone Ranger is the only answer that I could think to give. So maybe I have to reconsider how I want to start a sermon like this. He is a cowboy working mostly alone, who frankly is always saved by his associate and rescuer, Tonto, who is sort of a friend and mostly an enigma. Maria, could you please help their memories by playing?
The Lone Ranger.
Okay. There were over 3,000 episodes of that show between its radio and TV run. Similarly, Rawhide, for those who don't recall, the images for this show are a triad of cowboys, white guys, mostly very good looking, mostly set against scenes of the West as we imagine that long ago place. And of course, there are no women. It is a bro show. From 1959 to 1965, there were 8 seasons of a young Clint Eastwood fighting corrupt townspeople or lawless politicians. So much time alone out there on the prairies. Or Gunsmoke. I still listen to that on the big radio show. At the end of its 10 years on radio and 20 years on TV, Gunsmoke was described by Los Angeles Times columnist Cecil Smith as the dramatization of the American epic legend of the West. Our own Iliad and Odyssey, created from standard elements of the dime store novel, the pulp western as romanticized by Bunting, Hart, and Twain. It was ever the stuff of legend. I listened to Gunsmoke regularly on my public radio show, The Big Broadcast, and I remember its tagline, "It's a chancy job, makes a man watchful and a little lonely, but somebody has to do it." There were lots and lots of essentially solo white men operating the Old West, according to these stories. Believe this or not, but I really researched it 3 times. If you lived in a major city like New York or Washington, D.C. in the 1950s and early 60s, you had your choice of 51 different Westerns in a given week. Wow. I've been told by my husband, always a good reference point, that some folks hear the term cowboy as a label for a reckless person or maybe a lazy person, but I'm referring to a person who acts alone, who is always alone, who isn't part of a we. You could say Westerns are part of who we are as a nation. Not a very accurate part, but a part nevertheless. Our mythos, the myth of our creation. I think we can all agree that there were women in the West, that not every sheriff was honorable like Matt Dillon, not every cowboy was a good man. More accurately, somewhere around 30% of cowboys were Black, serving in all the roles. Cook, cattle driver, horse wrangler, and more, but you never saw a Black cowboy on TV. Indeed, I don't think I even realized that there were Black cowboys till pretty recently, even though I read Lonesome Dove and I knew that one of the crew there was a Black man named Joshua Dietz. Some women served in what we might think of as cowboy roles too, but they were known as cowgirls. I grew up knowing about performers Calamity Jane, Annie Oakley, but I didn't know that they had worked on the frontier earlier in their lives. So where does this cultural fascination with cowboys come from? Heather Cox Richardson, another good source, tells us that former Confederates celebrated the American cowboys who were moving cattle from Texas to railheads, first in Missouri and then northward across the plains, mythologizing them as true Americans. Although the American West depends on the federal government more than any other region of the country at that time and this, Southern Democrats claimed that the cowboy wanted nothing but for the government to leave him alone so that he could earn prosperity through his own hard work with other men in a land where they dominated Indigenous Americans, Mexicans, and women. Does that sound like a familiar myth today? Perhaps part of the idealization of cowboys comes from the paintings and photos of them. Imagine a background of mountains, dramatic clouds, really blue skies, endless vistas, and a horse kicking up some dust as it races. As nature photographer Jim Krantz says about one of his best photos, and it really is gorgeous, when I look at this photograph, I want to be that guy. He's super alive and in the moment. Everything about it is energizing, masculine, powerful. It is all of that. And frankly, it's an insidious message with that independent and false message of white men alone doing remarkable things. In the 1970s, American viewing peaked with close to 90 days of TV watching a year. And today, the average person watches closer to 50 hours. Probably the difference is other screens. It is spread among all the stations and streaming services, but for 3 years, for many years, there were 3 networks and PBS. If you focus on that 1970s number, and some of us came up in that time, pre-TV, it's shocking how much cowboy stuff many of us were exposed to. So why am I talking about this nostalgic topic, and why is this important? My answer comes from 2 books and some observations. First, I read the fabulous book, Attack from Within, How Disinformation is Sabotaging America by Barbara McQuaid. And then I read You Are What You Watch, How Movies and TV Affect Everything by Walter Hinckley. So we'll get to the observation in a few minutes. Hinckley reminds us that we are generally careful about what we eat, drink, or smoke. But when we consume with our eyes and ears, also impacts us. And he demonstrates that through scientific measurements such as respiratory frequency and intensity, chemical makeup of exhalations, and even the level of coagulants in our blood. Those measurements are different if you're watching a comedy or a horror movie or a soothing documentary, and this is his example about how champagne is made. So what we watch and put our attention on affects us deeply. Have you seen or heard about the gorilla basketball video? Okay, let me describe it for those who haven't. If we had a screen, I'd project it for you, or if I knew how to project for you, you do know how to project. But anyway, I'm just going to describe it. You'll have to believe me because I am telling the truth. It is called the selective attention test. The setup is that there are young people tossing two basketballs around, and some are wearing white shirts and others are wearing black shirts. The instruction is to count how many times the players wearing white shirts pass the ball, and they always pass to other white shirt people, for whatever that's worth. The young people then pass the ball, and at the end you're asked, how many passes did you count? You're informed that in the minute or so of the video, the correct answer is 15. And then the prompt says, but did you see the gorilla? A costumed person dressed as a gorilla walks through the basketball players, at one point standing in the center of the group, pounding its chest. And I'm going to admit, I didn't see the gorilla. In fact, even now I don't see the gorilla if I'm carefully counting the passes. I didn't want to get the count of passes wrong. It's easy to see the gorilla when you look for him. And it has me wondering what other gorillas in the room we don't see because we've been conditioned not to see them, because we were told to count the passes, or habituated to focus on the extraneous things that keep us from noticing the gorilla in the room. We can only pay attention to so many things at a time, and so we literally may not see that gorilla. Henke points out that in movies, TV, all those places, even theater, great direction is just crafting a movie in such a way that people intuitively agree on where to look. Bad direction is the failure to coax an audience's eyeballs into a herd, where everyone's experience of watching something is theirs and theirs alone. We are primed to agree with the point of view the director leads us to. And what does all of this have to do with truth or transformation or cowboys? What did hours and hours of such shows teach us about the world? How do they change us? What gorillas are we missing? To be changed for the better, what gorillas do we want to see? I think we need community, not aloneness. That is the transformative energy our communities offer. During the more active parts of the pandemic, I got into the reality show alone. Probably that had to do with the situation where so many of us were locked up alone or with a small pod. And I wanted to see how these people on that not great reality TV show survive their aloneness. J. Thomas Dunn, a film critic, wrote, "The reality TV series Alone is based on the very accurate premise that it is nearly impossible for a human individual to survive truly alone for any significant length of time." In this show, people were put down on a remote piece of land, one at a time, with a small handful of carefully chosen supplies and a lot of TV equipment. And all of that was what made the show. People on the show usually and they were allowed to tap out anytime they wanted. People on the show usually tap out not because they are sick or starving, but because they are lonely. They realize that their lives are basically empty and meaningless when removed from societal context. We are social animals. We depend upon the root system of humankind and the larger web of life on this planet. Dunn concludes individualism is an illusion, a lie perpetuated by those who would pit us against one another in order to distract us from the fact that we are being exploited and parasitized by them. This is true in our world, in our congregations and communities. And then it gets a little bit more complex. Just take a sit here. It gets a little bit more complex because a community where everyone agrees on everything may not be great, broad enough or deep enough to grow our spirits, to grow our understanding and change us in good ways. Some of you may like this sermon, some of you may not. I invite you to talk with each other about it. Share what your thoughts are, share what your reactions are. That builds your community, knowing about some of those differences, respecting those differences and learning about one another and other people's views through those conversations. And now, my observation. When I was at General Assembly this summer, they had taken the position that everyone was supposed to wear a mask all the time that they were indoors. That was in Baltimore this year. Some doubtless thought that wasn't needed. But our Unitarian Universalist Association, that is the UUA, and the UU Ministers Association stood up for the health of all by asking that we mask while we were in all of the buildings. I happen to know that there were people who could only come to these events because of that masking rule. There were people who had ongoing cancer treatments, immunological problems, and this policy allowed them to join in. I did not feel like wearing a mask, but I knew I wanted to do so because I was part of a community where that was how we were showing love to one another. So imagine my surprise when I went into a small group in one of my sessions and there was a person who wasn't wearing a mask, and when asked to do so, said, "No, I'm not doing that. I'm an individual making a choice." Another person said, "Oh, I forgot to put mine on for no reason. Give me a sec," reaching for the mask. And the first person said, "There is a reason. You are an individual." And the second person was cowed and kept off their mask. This behavior was actually spreading nonconformity right in front of us in our little group of 10. Could I even say spreading Lone Ranger energy? I did not know what to say or do. After weeks of thought, I wish I'd said, that isn't what we agreed to do in this space. Refusing to wear a mask is out of covenant. We all agreed to wear a mask while in the building. And then I should have paused, see if that person, the two people by then, would put on their masks. And if they didn't, I would have said, "I'm going to be over there with a group of people. Come join me if you want to." And those people could have been left behind. But we don't always think of the right thing to say at that moment. And as the saying goes, when we know better, we do better. I'll do better next time. It took me even longer to reflect, and after that reflection, I decided I wanted to preach on this story and this theme. I'll call it preaching on what I see as the hyper-individualistic thread in our society and at times in our denomination. I'll call it preaching on a community-focused transformation I'd encourage all of us to consider and maybe implement in our lives and congregations. I know that there are people who worry about what they call groupthink. Somebody said that to me. So I looked it up. That is a psychological phenomena where a group prioritizes harmony and conformity over critical thinking. That sounded to me like us. And that leads to poor decision making. Dissent is suppressed, members often self-censor, and the examples given when I researched this were the Bay of Pigs, Challenger disaster, People's Temple following Jim Jones and the mass suicide in 1978 in Guyana. To my eye, our denomination's decision to move to a list of values from the prior list of principles, or deciding to emphasize the use of pronouns, are very different scales of issues. Or we could mention the use of masks. Yet, concerns about groupthink have been raised by UUs in all three of those conversations. Again, I want to say that humans need community and connection, and excessive individualism will separate us rather than connect us as we move through these trying times. I knew when I thought about this sermon that I wanted to share Dr. King's words to wrap up the service. In 1965, at his commencement address for Oberlin College, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "What we are facing today is the fact that through our scientific and technological genius, we've made of this world a neighborhood. And now, through our moral and ethical commitments, we must make of it a brotherhood. We must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools." This is the great issue facing us today. No individual can live alone, no nation can live alone. We are tied together. So that was the end of his quote, but I'm going to just elaborate. Let us know that we are in a brotherhood, or in today's language, that we are siblings of the heart who must learn to live together as siblings. No individual can thrive alone. No denomination can prosper unless we know deep in our hearts that we are tied together into one interdependent web, so all may prosper together. We, all of us, are the ones that we are waiting for. Let us manifest the future together, today, in community. Amen.